Welcome to 5 Ways to Spot Fake Scrum. So this is based on a talk that I actually put together in a YouTube video, but I'll spare you the details for now. So I went to a restaurant last week in Chicago, and every week like a new one is springing up, and my friends are like, oh, this place is all the rage, you gotta go. They have the best noodles ever. Does anyone have a friend like that? Yeah, got a few. So I go to this place for lunch. It's about 11:30. I try to get in before the rush hour, and I didn't have a reservation. So I get in there, sit down, didn't think about it very much, order the special. Comes out about 5 minutes later, everything seems great. I take a bite. It was awful. It was completely terrible. And so I call the waiter over, and I'm like, what gives? I heard this place was all the rage. He's like, well, what's the problem? It's like, this tastes nothing like pasta. He goes, oh, that's an impasta. Wah, wah, wah. All right, I thought I'd warm you up with a joke. So my name's Pieper, like I was introduced here, founder of Responsive Advisors. We're a Chicago-based management consulting firm specializing in Scrum and those sorts of things. Been in PST a while. I guess you've already covered all the good stuff, but I'm also a YouTuber. I don't know if that was in there. And so we're a PTN provider with scrum.org, and we've got a booth out front, so stop by, spin our wheel. You could win candy or half-price class, or what else we got in there, $100 off one? Either way, stop by if you want a copy of this slide deck, and I'll happily send you a link. So what is fake Scrum? Has anybody ever experienced fake Scrum? Got one? Has anybody experienced real Scrum? That's two. Real Scrum. We got a couple? All right, well then maybe you won't need my help here. But I'm going to help you spot what fake Scrum looks like. So fake Scrum, why is it a problem? I mean, she thinks it's stupid, of course, but lots of problems. So you could spend a bunch of money on training, implement this whole new way of working, and it just doesn't work at all. But if you don't know, how do you know it's a problem? I mean, Scrum sounds good, right? Oh, we're agile. We're going to be amazing. But how do you know if it's working? So fake agile is a problem because you spend all this time and effort doing something new and you don't get anything out of it. So we're kind of spread out. There's kind of this effect where a trainer makes everyone go to the furthest spot in the room, and I'm seeing that here. Like there's a big orange, or big circle in front of me. Tell me about a time where you did a bunch of work and there was no obvious purpose, but you did it anyway. Anyone? No one? Well, that's fantastic, because I've done this before tons of times. Somebody from the business asks you to build something, and I was a software developer a long time ago. And it's interesting, it looks exactly like Excel, what they're asking me for here. And I say, well, why are we building it exactly like Excel? Oh, well, those are the requirements. Okay. So you build to the requirements, and you deliver it, and they're still unhappy with it. Can anyone relate? Yeah. You didn't know the purpose, but you did it anyway. Happens often in larger companies where there's this big chain of dependencies where requirements comes from one place and it goes to the doers and then it goes to the testers and then something's wrong and we don't find out about it for a while. So work without purpose. Is anybody comfortable working without purpose? Not a single one. Okay, that's interesting. So let's talk about purpose. The first way to spot fake Scrum is basically no goals, no purpose. What are we doing this for? How many of you are doing Scrum right now or on a team? Okay, how many of you have a sprint goal every sprint that makes sense? Okay, a few of you. More than I thought, frankly. But we're going to talk about it. So there's two major goals we see in Scrum. If you're familiar with the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide, they introduced this concept called a product goal. It's not that much different than a sprint goal, except for it's kind of longer time horizons, many sprints in the future. And so we call this a commitment to the product backlog, meaning you'll have a product goal on your product backlog, and it helps shape the product backlog. Creates focus, helps us achieve objectives. We're working towards something here. Who has product goals? A couple of you? Okay. So it's a newer concept. If you haven't read the Scrum Guide recently, you may not have seen it before. But another thing about it, we fulfill or abandon these things. We don't keep switching around. You don't keep taking on a new goal and then put that goal on the side, and then we take on this goal and we put that one to the side. That reduces focus. So anybody know why focus is such a big deal in Scrum?
Should have a deliverable by the end of it?
We should have a deliverable by the end of it. Yeah. What happens if you don't have focus? Would that reduce your ability to deliver sometimes? Yes, purpose gives you the ability to work on things and make trade-offs. If you know the context in which you're working, and something happens where you're like, hey, we got to do this or that, and you know the goal, you know the purpose, it's a lot easier for you to make a trade-off. So product goals, really important. They help us shape the product backlog. They help us achieve actual business objectives. Sprint goals, you guys are probably all familiar with this one if you've been to Scrum, any Scrum class. It's a commitment to the sprint backlog. So it helps shape what our sprint backlog looks like. It helps shape what we're going to accomplish for the next sprint. Also created by the Scrum team. So for some of you, this might just be review. But you'll find all this in the latest version of the Scrum Guide. Now, that was fake Scrum. Let's talk about a time when management asked you to do something and it made no sense, and you did it anyway. I got some chuckles here. Anybody got a story? A sentence? We've got one.
Business wants you to track which schools are, I work in education, which schools are doing one approach versus another approach, which students are doing this method or that method, only for it to get trashed the year later.
Okay, so the school was tracking who was doing things what way, who was doing things another way, and then they did nothing with the information?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Was that frustrating? How did that feel?
Well, honestly, I wanted to trash it from the get-go.
All right, wanted to trash it from the get-go? Anyone else? How does it feel to be externally managed, where somebody tells you what to do? I mean, you guys are all grown adults that I can tell. We've been out of kindergarten a little while now. Is it frustrating to be a grown adult professional and have somebody else tell you what to do and it doesn't make any sense? Got a couple head nods? So the second way to spot fake Scrum is basically look for no self-management. You got a team, they're being treated like hamburger order takers and being fed Big Mac orders. They're not allowed the opportunity to solve the problem creatively. And if you have engineers solving problems, they went to school to solve problems. They know how to solve problems. Oftentimes they get in the real world and now they're told what to do. So eventually some of these people leave the company, but some of them stay and they just learn to follow orders and they become used to this. We got a couple head nods on that one. Yeah. And that's a really, really subtle one, a very difficult one to see. And you'll see it manifest in a few ways. One of them is a developer won't do a single thing unless it's perfectly documented in a requirements specification. They won't lift a finger. Anyone seen that before? Yep, almost all of us. That's a sign of years of abuse, years of not being able to solve their own problems. And when they do, and the customer comes back and says, but this is wrong, wait a minute, you specified this in the requirements document. And they're frustrated because they put all their blood, sweat, and tears into this solution. The customer doesn't like it. Next time, they're just going to wait until those requirements are perfect and not take a chance. So look for that. No self-management. So here's some things you'll likely find. Teams are slow to find issues because it wasn't specified in the requirements. Or if they don't have full context to make decisions, I mean, going back to no goals, that can be a real problem. But if you're going to tell developers or people building the solutions exactly what to do, you better be right. Because if you're wrong, now it's going to come back. Even worse, when the project is really large and we don't find out for many months or even years, what we're doing is on the wrong track. What else is good in here? Less creativity. Why do we want creativity in solving problems? Any benefits there? I mean, we're not artists, are we? Any artists in the room? Why would you want a creative technical solution?
Come up with a better solution.
You might come up with a better solution, absolutely. So if I go to a group of developers and I say, get me a way to work. I don't care how you do it, I just need to be there in 30 minutes. That's a problem to solve. But if I say, build me a bicycle, I want 5 wheels on it, and I want an air conditioner. Okay, that's the dumbest solution I've ever heard of, but you're paying me to do what you tell me to do, so I'm just going to go do it. And then I get it back and I realize it's winter and this isn't really solving my problem. So we want engineers and developers to be creative because they're going to probably come up with a better solution that can be specified with a lot less documentation. Yeah, common problem, very, very common problem. Also approvals. I hate approvals. I hate proving things. I hate waiting for approvals. It makes everything slower. My team just recently was dealing with this. We were having another team do some work for us. It was waiting for approvals. A month later, we still don't have anything. Turns out we could do the work ourselves in an hour. So do you want to go fast or do you want to wait for things? And you really got to think about that when it comes to self-management. So here's some Scrum Guide quotes about self-management. And you can take photos of this if you like, but it's also right there in the Scrum Guide, freely available. Adaptation becomes more difficult when people involved are not empowered or self-managing. A Scrum team is expected to adapt the moment it learns anything new through inspection. There's some fancy words there: inspection, adaptation. Read about it, theory of Scrum. So they're calling it right out. Scrum doesn't work as well without self-management. Another one, Scrum teams are cross-functional, meaning the members have all the skills necessary to create value each sprint. They're also self-managing, meaning they internally decide who does what, when, and how. Again, calling out, this is how a good Scrum team functions. Any managers in the room? I really don't want to be ruffling too many feathers. It's not even barely after lunch. Okay, good. Fake Scrum. All right, so this one we're actually going to do in pairs. I warmed you up, we did a couple, but find somebody in the room. We can get up, you can move around. Discuss a time when you worked on something for a while, like maybe years before it was finally done. How did that feel? What were the results of this? I mean, the worst project I heard was 7 years before they shipped the thing. And believe it or not, that was from a shipping company, FedEx. Anyway, so find a pair. You got 2 minutes. I'll set a timer. So what did we come up with? Anybody got a quick sentence?
It's going into year 8. So
Year 8. You're setting a new record. I ask this question a lot. Wow, 8 years. So how does that feel?
horrible.
True.
Why is it taking 8 years?
The major stakeholders, sponsors have changed over and over. We've switched up what we're doing. This is a better way to do it and do Agile. We went from SAFe to, I'm not sure what the other one was called. Actually, then they go, they're calling it a real Agile environment.
A real Agile environment?
Yeah, it originally was planned for waterfall, and we were told now the CIO loves Agile, so no more waterfall, just do an Agile.
So you've changed the way you work all the way through this 8-year project and still don't have anything to show for 8 years of effort.
We have one part out of 8.
1 part out of 8?
Well,
Okay. Well, hopefully it's not software, because I mean, in the future, could it be obsolete by the time you release?
oh, it has been,
It's already obsolete?
yeah. So that's why we haven't released it all.
Gotcha. That was what happened to my friends over at FedEx. Like by the time they actually released the thing, the underlying technology was already so old it had to be rebuilt from scratch, and their enhancements were almost meaningless.
That's happened twice.
Happened twice. So, yeah, it's painful. Anybody have a positive story? I mean, I think it's a leading question here. Oh, it was great that we waited 3 years to release. This is almost never a good time in technology, or a good amount of time. If you're building a bridge and it takes 3 years, how much does the Earth really change in 3 years? Unless you're on the big island of Hawaii. I heard they're just having a volcano blow up for the first time since '82. Anyway, Earth doesn't change too much, so building a bridge, having it take 3 years, yeah, you delay value, but not that many things are going to change, and when you release it, it's probably still as valuable as when you started. But in technology, software, it's typically a problem. So yeah, basically we're talking about the third way to spot fake Scrum here is no deliverables. And I don't just mean no deliverables ever. I mean no deliverables in a short time horizon. I mean Agile. Think about that for a second. Forget the word Agile. I realize it's a religion to some people. What's a synonym for the word Agile? Anyone? Flexible. Any others? Iterative, okay. I mean, that's definitely a means to be nimble and agile, but yeah, I'm thinking like nimble, responsive, adaptable, right? When you're getting to a certain point and you realize you're on the wrong track, you can immediately change gears. But unlike the Titanic wasn't so good at that, right? The Titanic was like, we're fine, we're just gonna keep going straight ahead. That didn't work out for it, and they didn't really have a lot of time to change direction after they crashed into their iceberg. So deliverables, the idea of those in any agile development framework whatsoever, is to give you these pivot points. So without deliverables, with no increment at the end of the sprint, and by the way, that's the whole point of Scrum, is to have these every single sprint without fail, you have no value delivered. You could be off track and you might not know it. You've got no valuable feedback coming from stakeholders. You ever go into like a project somebody is working on and they go, what do you think? And you're like, but that thing is very weird. Oh, don't worry about that thing. Look out over this. No, but that thing is so broken I can't stop looking at it. Without done things, this is what your stakeholders are thinking in a sprint review. They're focused on the things that are broken. They're not focused on the things that are useful. So Scrum gets a little crazy on this one. If you read the Scrum guide, they say you don't even show anything that is not fully done in a sprint review. Mainly so you're not getting feedback on stuff that is unfinished and therefore wasting a lot of time in the conversation. So the whole point of Scrum, again, I can't say this enough times, is to develop some sort of a usable version of whatever it is you're building every single sprint. And you get to decide how much of that version you build and how long your sprints are. So it shouldn't be too hard to achieve for most teams. But 8 years, man, wow, new record. Fake Scrum. All right, so now that I got you guys warmed up, let's talk about this one. A time when you didn't have all the facts, but you know somebody else did, and you're the one who has to make the decision. You don't have all the facts. How does that feel?
Frustrating.
Frustrating. Any other words?
Nerve-wracking.
Nerve-wracking. Yeah. Doesn't that feeling increase with how sensitive it is of the thing you're working on? I mean, if you're a surgeon and you don't have all the facts, you've got somebody's life in your hands. If you're just building a website that's a throwaway, maybe not as big of a deal. But I'm assuming most of us are somewhere in between. Building things that are critical enough and very expensive. And if you don't have all the facts, you're likely going to make the wrong decisions. Does Scrum have a mechanism to solve this problem? Anyone know? Well, I'll tell you, the fourth way to spot fake Scrum. No transparency. We don't have all the facts. Remember that self-managing team we were talking about? They don't work very well without facts or proper information. And I don't mean they know everything. They know enough to do their jobs. They know enough to move forward, and what they don't know, they're going to be careful about, experiment, and then take a look at the sprint review and make sure that it worked out. They might run an experiment and try something and see how it goes if they don't have the information. But the less information a self-managing Scrum team has, the more likely they will make mistakes. The more likely that will be expensive. When you don't have transparency, your estimates are completely wrong. Estimates will never be perfect, but they can be better than crap. Release forecasts. When we think, oh, this will be done in about a year, and it takes 3, that usually doesn't make your CIO super happy. 3 extra years of your team's salary. It's a lot of money. So with transparency, with a little bit of focus on improving that over time, well, we can get a lot better outcomes. Any thoughts on this one, on transparency?
So do you, I don't know, you probably know, Safe Agile?
I've heard of it.
Product iterations or?
Yep. In SAFe, like they plan out things, is that better? Basically, SAFe is built on Scrum as a foundation. It's designed to take multiple Scrum teams and sort of build it up as a larger group. So they add a few extra layers on typical Scrum teams. What they have in common is they're planning and they're delivering something. Where SAFe somewhat differs, and it depends on your implementation, is typically the time horizon. So 3-month program increments, I hear, are fairly common, especially for larger companies. And PI planning, or these 2-day big room kind of planning events where you get a room this size and we're all planning things for a couple days. Now, you can argue the pros and cons of that. Scrum is typically smaller, where you're not planning for more than a single day for a month worth of work, but you have something done within 1 month, not 3 months. And so you reduce a little bit more risk by getting to a deliverable much, much faster. But ultimately, we're still focusing on planning things and getting to a certain checkpoint. So again, they have those in common. And the transparency that gets produced in, say, PI planning is similar to sprint planning, where we might talk to the customers or the stakeholders or your product owner or whatever you got in your organization to learn more so that we can make better decisions about how we plan the next iteration of work. But where this falls apart often is you hand a stack of requirements off to a development team and say, there's your next project, and you run off. and they don't have the full understanding, and if the spec isn't perfect, we're back to that, some of the first dysfunctions we talked about, where they don't understand the purpose, or they're not self-managing, and they build what you ask, and 80% of it isn't right. Or at best, only 20% of it isn't right, but that's still a lot of money. Another mechanism we find in just vanilla Scrum is this idea of product backlog refinement. And so that's typically, they used to call it backlog grooming for any of you guys who've been around the block after dark. And the idea of that is you get the developers and the product owner to collaborate on what the backlog looks like and what problems we're solving a little bit ahead of time, so that when you get into a sprint, the developers understand the problem. It's just a matter of what does the solution look like. And so in sprint planning, they'll focus more on engineering a solution than about asking about requirements. But kind of like just-in-time requirements gathering, where you wouldn't do this for 6 years worth of work, but maybe a month or two. Kind of get ahead of it. Like the developers are thinking, oh, do we have any dependencies here? Do I have to call for an API key? Do I need a server? Do I need a skill set? And so by knowing that ahead of time, you have fewer dependencies within the sprint, and more likely to finish things, more likely to get to that done deliverable. And so that transparency comes from the active product backlog refinement. But also by having the right people in the room for sprint planning. If you don't have the right product owner, that can reduce transparency quite a bit. How many of you have seen product owners that are not much more than a document writer, and somebody else really makes the decisions and they kind of just write down the requirements? Got a few of you, right? So the developers ask the product owner questions and they go, I don't know, let me ask the boss. Oh wait, they're out of the office for the next 2 weeks. Well, if your sprints are 2 weeks long, not getting much done that sprint. So transparency, it comes from a lot of places where we understand the decision maker's needs and wants, or we understand what the requirements are, we understand the dependencies, we understand how much work there really is to be done. Another problem with transparency is in technical debt. Anyone familiar with that term? Yeah, commonly known as basically making trade-offs in terms of maintainability for speed. So for those of you not familiar, you're all familiar with plumbing, right? You have like a sink and a pipe underneath. If you drop your wedding ring down there, you can get it back out by unscrewing a pipe. If you don't know that, there's a tip for the day. So you can unscrew those pipes and pull it down and get all the gross stuff out of there, but then you find your ring. It didn't go all the way down into the pipes. That may have happened to me once before. Imagine a plumber just welded that all together when the home was built, because it was cheaper and faster. They just weld all your plumbing together. If there's a single problem, they gotta cut it all apart and they gotta weld a new pipe in. A lot more expensive to maintain, but quicker to set up. So a lot of technical people, especially in software development, under pressure, make some changes that are not things you should really see after dark. Like they're scary to look at. Like, anyone software developers in the room? No one? Okay, how about this? Excel users? Okay. Imagine you take a really, really gnarly formula, okay? It's like 15 lines long, takes up the whole screen, right? It's like X times Y times B times 29 times X times an entire pivot table. And then you copy and paste that and put it in 6 other spreadsheets. And a month from now, you realize you made a calculation error. It's like 6 times harder to fix, isn't it? Well, at least you got to figure out the other spreadsheets that all need to be repaired too. That's a common anti-pattern in software development, where they copy and paste logic and put it into multiple places, and when it needs to be fixed, they have to fix it in many places. And not always are those places the same anymore. So, where am I going with this? It reduces transparency into how hard the work is when the former developer went in there and made a huge mess of it all. So transparency, really, really important in Scrum. Really important to drive results and get forecasts right. So think of a hurricane forecast. How often are those updated? Like a lot, right? By the minute, by the hour, as soon as new data comes in, they update the forecasts. If you live in Miami and a hurricane's coming 4 days away, I'm really interested if my house is going to get wiped out. So I'm watching the news, and that data is getting updated. They don't just tell you once a week, but there's only so much they know 2 weeks out. Ooh, tropical storm is forming in the Atlantic. Okay, well, what does that mean for me 2 weeks from now? I have no idea. So think about your large releases being similar to a hurricane forecast, especially if they're expensive. So if we could lose a lot of money by being wrong, you want to get the data and update your forecasts on a regular basis. With good Scrum teams, I see them updating those release plans perhaps once a sprint, if not more frequently. And if you're in a really risky situation, consider shortening your sprint length. Like 1 week is pretty good. 2 weeks, why do we do 2 weeks? Anyone have an idea? Because it can be anywhere between, I don't know, 1 day and 4 weeks. Why 2 weeks?
Does it give you enough time to pivot?
Gives you enough time to pivot? Okay. I mean, why is 2 weeks the magic number? I don't know. It just seems like it's kind of like tradition. But anywhere under a month, according to Scrum, is pretty good. And shorter is usually better because it gives you more times to pivot. More times where we can update our data to update those release forecasts. And more times where we can check in with the customer and say, hey, this is done. You want me to change anything? You like the color? You like that Hello Kitty logo at the bottom left? Oh, you don't? Let me remove that the next sprint. Anyway, transparency, super important stuff. So are bugs. So Scrum Guide quote on that: the emergent process in work must be visible to those performing the work as well as those receiving the work. Now, it sounds like a religious statement almost. It must do this, it must do that, but why? Because if it's not, we saw what problems we have. We saw that customers end up unhappy. We have inaccurate release forecasts. We have all kinds of technical problems that don't get solved till later. All right, another quote. Important decisions are based on the perceived state of its 3 formal artifacts. Also very big words. Does anybody remember what those 3 artifacts in Scrum are? All right, artifact is a fancy word, but we've got the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. Well, we just call it the increment in Scrum, but PI, they'll call it in SAFe. And the increment, again, is that valuable thing. It is that deliverable. It is the solution that you provide at the end of a sprint. These are the 3 formal artifacts. And so they need to be transparent. If your product backlog is not transparent, you'll build the wrong thing. If your sprint backlog is not transparent, the developers won't know what they're doing. And if the increment isn't transparent, you'll have no idea if it's usable, if the quality is good enough, if it's safe for consumption. I mean, imagine somebody gives you a pack of chocolate chip cookies and you have no idea if they're safe to eat or not. No, they're probably good. I mean, they look fine, but you don't know. Quality is important when it comes to food, right? And medical stuff.
Yeah, but they're chocolate chip cookies. You'll take a chance.
You'll take a chance? So, in a plant where they're making these chocolate chip cookies, they might even run them under a metal detector to make sure no screws got into the thing from a machine that malfunctioned. Or they're checked for consistency and size, vacuum sealing. All these things are going to be tested for before a package gets onto a truck and heads to your local grocery store. How do we know something is quality in Scrum? Is there a formal mechanism? Anyone know it? The definition of done. Fancy words. People usually think of done with the whole project is done. But what they mean in Scrum is this thing is now usable. It's a small piece of usability. It's 1 chocolate chip cookie out of 100 dozen, but you can eat it right now and it's safe for consumption. So the definition of done creates transparency around this artifact we call the increment. All on the Scrum Guide. And then we got another Scrum Guide quote. Artifacts that have low transparency can lead to decisions that diminish value and increase risk. Who knows the point of Scrum? Like, why? It says it in the beginning of the Scrum Guide. So your homework is to read the Scrum Guide. Just like 12 pages, it's not that bad. Nobody dies at the end, so no spoiler alerts here. But in the beginning, they talk about what the point of it is. And it's really about mitigating risk and delivering value. Little bits of value, mitigating risk. Little bits of value, mitigating risk. But it's designed for domains that are considered complex. Or what that means is basically situations where there's a lot more unknowns than knowns. Typically, waterfall is best applied when you have a lot of knowns. Like building a bridge. We know we want a bridge. We know we want 10 lanes. We know what the ground looks like. Concrete technology hasn't changed that much. And so it's easier to put together a waterfall plan for building a bridge. But building a software solution for a problem that could change, like the metaverse, sorry, Mark, that's just not going to work, man. Anyway, you might be a metaverse fan. I'm not. But we'll see, right? I mean, they got billions of dollars on the line to find out if this is working, and they're trying to constantly develop new pieces of value and put it out there. Frankly, I haven't tried it. I don't have the fancy VR glasses. So anyway, Transparency. This enables inspection. And in the theory of Scrum section of the Scrum Guide, they talk about transparency, inspection, adaptation, otherwise known as your Aunt Tia. It's a way to remember it. Tia is your aunt in Spanish. I don't even speak Spanish. He tells me it all the time. So transparency makes inspection possible, or it makes it meaningful. So inspection without transparency is misleading, and frankly, it's wasteful. So a lot of time here spent on this one around transparency, but that is basically fake Scrum without it. All right, next one. So let me think if I've got any really good stories. Web development. Web development doesn't always lead to more customers, and you sometimes do a lot of work and you build this amazing website, and at the end of the day, you look at Google Analytics or a new tool I just discovered called Microsoft Clarity. Has anyone heard of that one? It's pretty cool. It'll like put heat maps on your website and show you where people are going. And you're thinking, oh, this is going to be an amazing part of the website, and no one ever goes to it. And you promote it, and they still don't go to it. There's been videos I've made and put on YouTube, and I'm like, only 300 views? Really? I really like that video, and I put a lot of energy into it. And then one that I kind of just threw together gets like 44,000 views. No idea why. I wish I could repeat that over and over. So sometimes you do a lot of work, and it just doesn't matter at all. But in terms of an agile transformation, this can be a really big problem. You do all this work, you learn about Scrum, and no one cares. So the fifth way to spot fake Scrum is basically look for no results. You're doing all these things and you have all these labels and these Scrum Masters and product owners and all these whatever you call them, bunch of meetings, and nothing changed. So where I commonly see this is giant waterfall projects. 2 years of work, we're doing these things called sprints, but you don't really have deliverables. And we have these teams, but they're not really self-managing. And you're building something, but you have no purpose. Or you have all of these things, and your stakeholders are just completely disengaged. Why do we want engagement from our stakeholders? Or customers, whatever you call them?
For feedback.
Yeah, we want feedback, but what kind of feedback? What if they just always say to us, oh, that looks beautiful, keep on going, call me when you're done? Is that good feedback? I mean, it might be if you like feeling good about yourself, but it doesn't help you improve anything. When we run classes, I'm pretty consistent about asking my students to give me the worst thing. Like, what did you not like? Great, you can praise me all day long, thank you. But what did you not like? What can I use to improve the class or how we set it up or whatever? If you're not doing the same thing with your product, you're not getting critical feedback to improve it. And so you could go a lot longer before you get that feedback. Like, wow, this thing is cool, but man, is it slow. I wish I would have got that feedback about a year ago when we built the architecture. Yeah, got a comment.
I mean, in order to get the feedback, obviously, the cheaper it is. They don't tell you until it's in production that you're spending a lot more money to go back and rework the product. So.
That's a great point. Feedback sooner makes it cheaper to fix. Yep. It can be really expensive when you're building something with a lot of subjectivity. Back to those chocolate chip cookies. Meatloaf walnut. Anybody want to buy $1 million? No? Meatloaf walnut? Doesn't that sound amazing? A little bit of the savory, a little bit of the salty. How much meatloaf should we put into it? No idea. So that would be an example of where you'd want to try something and give it to your friend and have them taste it. I mean, in Wisconsin, where I'm from originally, and yeah, anyway, their state fair, they eat things like this. What was the latest thing? Krispy Kreme cheeseburger? Yeah, most people either prefer the burger or the Krispy Kreme, so they throw the other one away, I'm told. But yeah, Krispy Kreme cheeseburgers. I got a couple frowny faces in the room. That's Wisconsin. But like, I wouldn't make 1 million of them and try to mass market it. So you need that feedback. You need your stakeholders engaged. And where you don't have stakeholders engaged, it can be a very subtle problem, where you have these things called sprint reviews, but no one shows up. Or even worse, it's the developers reviewing to the product owner because the product owner's been disengaged for 3 sprints. Anyone seen that one? Yeah? Or the product owner is your boss, and they've been fighting fires for 3 months, and they never come to your sprint review, so the developers review to themselves. But they're on the same team. Why are you reviewing it to yourselves? But they have the meeting. Looks like Scrum, doesn't it? But it's fake. The main idea with Scrum is if done right, we get to a point where it can at least drive and get you to work. And then we can worry about it being a Cadillac. And then once we're at a Cadillac, then you can decide if you want it to float. But it's always that thing first before we then enhance it. Sometimes you got to rip the architecture down and start over. But when you're always in flux with architecture, it's very hard to get to any deliverable state. And so back to purpose, I mean, even at a micro level, product backlog items are best served as micro problems to solve. And so with your giant system, right, 3 major systems you were mentioning that had to be integrated, I bet there was one problem that if we could solve it tomorrow, would make at least 5% of our users pretty thrilled. And if you just solve that one little problem, and then take on the next problem, and then the next problem, moving in the direction of being a Cadillac, you might at some point realize, hey, you know what, being just a Buick would be good enough. But if it could float, that would be pretty cool. So skip the leather, let's worry about buoyancy. But you're always at a deliverable state. You're always solving problems. It's always usable. Not unlike a paycheck. Does anyone get a paycheck once a year? Who wants to get paid once a year? Okay, who as an employer, imagine you all start businesses tomorrow and you hire a group of employees, who's going to pay them for a year worth of work day one? Why not? You concerned they might not show up on day 2? Are you concerned your business might not be, your company might not exist and they said they were going to pay you at the end of the year? It's day 360 and they go belly up. You don't get your paycheck. So there's a lot of risk inherent in that. And so typically we're talking about, what, every 2 weeks people get paid? Sounds a lot like a sprint, doesn't it? You give some work for 2 weeks, you get some pay for 2 weeks. So think about that. When you go back to work and you're dealing with increments, it's like a paycheck. Every sprint review is payday for you and the customers. All right, so some final thoughts on Scrum, and it seems like there's a lot of you that have some war stories. I'd love to hear about some of them. Some final thoughts. I mean, the point of Scrum is basically you've got risks managed. Now, you're not going to eliminate risk, not in a complex environment, but we can at least manage them effectively. And what I'm hearing is like when we have 8-year projects, risks aren't managed very well, and that's very expensive. 3-year ERPs that don't get implemented, that's expensive. Or forecasts that are notoriously wrong and change and we don't update them fast enough. Risks aren't managed. Goals are accomplished if Scrum is done right. But we got to know what those goals are. We got to know what our product goal is. We got to know what our sprint goal is. All in the context of some form of a product vision. Value gets delivered. Again, back to that paycheck. We get paid every 2 weeks. The customer gets something of value every 2 weeks or less. Opportunities uncovered. We didn't talk a ton about that, but what if in a sprint review, you show something to your customer and they go, that is pretty darn cool. I know I asked for all these other things, but can you enhance this instead? I'll pay you extra if you can do that. And you're like, wait, don't do those things, but work more on this? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Okay, and you do it and you make them so thrilled they buy 2 of them. Those are the kinds of opportunities we're after using Scrum. And the only way to do that is to build something small, give it to your customer, let them play with it, and then give you real feedback based on real results. So we want to look for those. Good Scrum teams will find opportunities by putting something in front of their customers quickly. And then just complexity being reduced. When we're trying to build something in short time horizons, you can't build this mega system because we have a 2-week time horizon. I got to have a solution done in 2 weeks. So that means I might have to try a little bit in the architecture vision in terms of where I want to go, but I can't build this giant super system all in 2 weeks. So kind of losing my train of thought on that, but mainly what I'm talking about is we might have an architecture vision, but we're not going to spend 3 months building the perfect database before we have the first feature that a customer can use. You'll build a little bit, knowing where you want to go with the database, but you still have to have a problem solved. So maybe we start with a flat file, see how that works, and then we build a table in a SQL server. Or then we go to something more advanced as time moves on. But much like SimCity, has anyone ever played that game? Love that game. So for those of you who've never played it, it's basically a simulator, kind of like, it's based on the same company that makes The Sims. So SimCity, you're a mayor of this fictitious town, and all you can really do is influence the environment by setting up like commercial, residential, and industrial zones, and then people magically move in. And when people move in, they find jobs, and then the industrial section grows, all without you touching anything. But if you don't do things right at sort of a governance level, it all falls apart. People move out of your town, crime increases, your tax base goes down, and eventually, when your expenses exceed your revenue, your town goes out of business. So Anyway, SimCity, you got to start a little bit, try something out, learn from the results, and adapt. If you try to put all the infrastructure in all at once, you lose the game really quickly, just like in life. Fake Scrum, final summary. It is everywhere. It's everywhere. We teach a lot of classes, and a lot of people come in there. They know Scrum, they know it, but they learned a lot when they leave the class. And it's because they come in with misconceptions. They come in believing Scrum is about one thing, and then they find out it's actually about something else. Something a bit more common sense. They thought originally it was just about, you got to show up to these meetings, you got to say these words. It's not the point. So you got to know the point of Scrum to be able to spot fake Scrum. But fake Scrum gives real Scrum a bad name. I hear it a lot. A lot of people don't like Scrum. I see it on the internet. Oh, Scrum is stupid. Scrum doesn't work for this, doesn't work for that. But they're basing it on falsehoods or myths, and they just don't know the difference. But self-management, we talked about that one. It is Scrum's secret sauce. Self-managing teams solve problems, and it's not unlike a kindergarten group and you give them a kickball. They usually self-manage a game out of that somehow. So, I think we covered all this. Thank you very much for coming. Check out our YouTube channel if you want to see more of my crazy antics, except for I'm not like dressed up. I'm in my music studio wearing a heavy metal shirt. So a little bit more the real me. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.